Episode 2: Growing Pains and Gavel Drops. The brain science that we ignore. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to Cupcakes and Conversations. I'm Liz, Elizabeth Asante-St. James, if we're being formal, but here we try to keep it comfy. If you're new, this is where we talk about real stuff over real treats. Topics like justice, second chances, and the messy parts of healing. Today's treat is a bittersweet bloom. It's a chocolate cupcake with a dark chocolate ganache and a cherry compote on top that hits you with richness but leaves you with a little sweetness, kind of like today's conversation. Last time, we discussed how outdated sentencing laws trap people in prison, even when they've grown and changed. This time, we are going to rewind the clock a bit and talk about brain development, because the truth is, when a lot of these people were sentenced, their brains weren't even fully developed. So let's get into it. Part 1: The Age of Mistakes. So, what were you like at 18 or 21? Out all night benders? Cow tipping? TP in other people's houses? Doing the walk of shame? If you're cringing a little bit right now, you're not alone. At 18, I was bold, I was impulsive, I was always in my feelings, and I was convinced I knew everything. Spoiler alert, I didn't know shit. My husband was 18 when he was sentenced. On paper, that made him an adult. But in terms of real life, his thought process, he was still figuring out who he was. Now imagine having to grow up fast in a world that's already stacked against you with poverty, trauma, underfunded schools, over-policed neighborhoods. For Black and brown youth, this isn't a rarity, it's a reality. So when we say they really should have known better, we should be asking, did they actually have the tools to know better? Consider the case of Centoya Brown, who was sentenced to life in prison at 16 for killing a man who solicited her for sex. Her case garnered national attention, highlighting how the justice system often fails to consider the complex circumstances and developmental stages of young offenders. So here's the thing: we have the science. We've had the science. We just aren't using it where it matters the most. The American Psychological Association says the human brain continues to develop well into a person's mid-20s, particularly in areas responsible for decision making, impulse control, and foreseeing consequences. The National Institute of Justice put it plainly in 2016, saying that young adults are neurologically distinct and respond differently to risk and peer pressure. So, what does that mean? If you ask a 5-year-old when Christmas is, they're going to say, tomorrow, next Friday, this weekend, because they have no concept of time. They don't know it's July and Christmas is December. They don't understand the concept of that time. Just like when a young offender commits a crime, they don't understand the consequences of, okay, yeah, they're giving me 15 years to life. They don't understand how long life is. That 19-year-old that made a terrible decision, he wasn't just being reckless. His brain literally wasn't wired yet to think it all the way through. Young people rely heavily on the amygdala, the emotional part of the brain. That prefrontal cortex, the one that's responsible for slowing us down and making thoughtful decisions. That thing's still under construction until you turn about 25. You throw in trauma, you throw in drug use, you throw in alcoholism. Sometimes it doesn't ever fully develop. It depends on the circumstances. When you live in these high poverty, high crime areas, your body and your brain are in a state of constant stress that impacts the way your brain develops greatly. And yet we expect an 18-year-old to think like a 40-year-old. And then when they don't, we hit them with sentences that don't leave room for change. That doesn't sound like justice. That sounds like punishment without understanding. That's like that same 5-year-old hits his sister. You tell them no. You put him in the corner for 3 hours. After a couple minutes, they don't remember why they were in the corner to start with. So, does the punishment fit the crime for that age? 3 hours in the corner for slapping a sister for a 5-year-old is probably a bit much. So, why isn't it the same way with young offenders when they commit a crime? Because that's what's wild. The legal system flips a switch at 18. One day you're a minor, the next you're held to the exact same standard as somebody that's got decades of life behind them and probably had more support growing up, better examples growing up, healthier home life growing up. But we need to look at other systems. We don't treat 18-year-olds like full grown adults anywhere else except for maybe the military. An 18-year-old can't rent a car. Most places they can't buy alcohol. Most places they can't buy cigarettes or vapes. They can't even really get affordable car insurance until they're 25. But you commit a crime and now you're adult enough for a life sentence. So in Ohio, a man named Kevin Boyd was sentenced to 40 years at age 19. And despite a perfect prison record and him mentoring others, he was still denied parole. Why? Because the system only sees who he was then, not who he is now. There are places starting to get it, though. Washington, D.C. has passed the Second Look Amendment Act that lets folks who are under the age of 25 when sentenced ask for their resentencing after 15 years. Illinois conducts parole reviews for anyone sentenced under 21, and California has the youth offender parole. These aren't soft policies, they're based in science. And the people that are released under them, most of them don't come back. That's proof these second chances work. In California, the youth offender parole process has shown promising results. According to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, individuals released under this program have a recidivism rate significantly lower than the general population, demonstrating the effectiveness of considering developmental maturity in parole decisions. So here's a case that has recently resurfaced in the spotlight: the Menendez brothers. Eric and Lyle Menendez, in 1989, killed their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez. They claimed years of sexual abuse by their father, a claim that received limited courtroom consideration during their second trial. They were convicted in 1996 and sentenced to life without parole, but recently their case has resurfaced. Since the release of Ryan Murphy's Netflix drama, Monsters, the Lyle and Eric Menendez story, in September of 24, public interest in the Menendez brothers' case has resurged, sparking calls for their release after 35 years in prison. A Los Angeles judge has been set to consider their request, including a motion to reduce their charges to manslaughter, which has been supported by their attorney Mark Garrigus. However, proceedings were postponed amid disagreements between the defense and prosecution and a request to review a state parole board's risk assessment report. The brothers, now incarcerated near San Diego, observed the proceedings remotely without any visible emotion. This case underscores how the system often overlooks the developmental stages of young offenders and the impact of drama on their actions. So, what if we got smart? What if we had checkpoints, say after 10 to 15 years, where someone could present who they are now? What if parole boards had standardized scaling systems in place so that way it was more uniform and there was an actual checklist that people could achieve? What if trials had mental health experts to explain how brain development impacts decisions, not as an excuse, but as context? What if we built programs in prison that reflect what the brain actually needs to grow, especially for young adults? We're not talking fantasy here. This is real world, evidence backed reform. Countries like Germany and Norway already treat incarcerated youth with a focus on rehabilitation and education, and the recidivism rates are way lower than ours. We could also implement trauma informed training for corrections officers, develop mentorship programs that pair older reformed adults with younger inmates, offer therapy that addresses both individual responsibility and root causes like trauma and poverty. But here's the truth: if the system is truly about justice, it can't be static. It has to evolve just like people do. I think about how many people we've lost, Not just the victims of violence, but the folks we've thrown away before they even had a chance to grow up. My husband is someone who draws every day. He tries to do better. He has taken programs. He's in AA and A. He tries to help the younger guys avoid the same traps he fell into. He's been in institutional dog programs, training pound puppies, and taking care of staff animals. But because he was 18 when he committed his crime, that growth may never count. Now let's come back to the Menendez brothers. Whether you believe their abuse claims or not, they were 18 and 21 when they committed that act. If we can't even re examine a case that complicated and trauma ridden, then what hope is there for others? It isn't about excusing violence. If you ask my husband, he takes all responsibility for the choices he made and the things that he did. We need to ask what kind of society we want to be. Do we want punishment for the sake of punishment? Or do we want safety, healing, and transformation? Because real justice isn't just a gavel drop, it's a process, one that grows just like people do. So, the cupcake I've made, it's a little sour and a little sweet, just like life, just like growth, and just like this conversation. It's the kind of flavor that lingers, like the stories we carry, the justice we're still fighting for. I'll put the full recipe down in the description and on the social media sites, just in case you're ready to do a little kitchen therapy. And if you're with me still, thank you. These are heavy topics, but we show up for them because we know ignoring them costs lives. Next time, we're talking about parole boards, how they work. Spoiler, it isn't that great. Why they're often a rubber stamp for denial, and what really goes on behind those closed doors. If you think the justice system is wild now, you're going to want to be here for that one. In the meantime, share this with somebody who needs to hear it. Drop a comment or a story. Send me an email. Let's keep building this, one conversation and one cupcake at a time. Thanks for listening. Stay sweet, stay real, and I will see you next time.